I think we're all probably familiar with the phrase of playing second fiddle. And that has come, of course, that comes from the world of music and the orchestra. And it was a phrase that was actually, seems to have been originated in the 19th century, talking about the position of the second violin in the orchestra. And how the second fiddle, the person in the second chair, by some is considered in ways to be less important or honored than obviously the lead violinist. Everybody wants to be sitting in the first one. Except of the fact that really whether or not that orchestra succeeds or fails depends upon who is in the second seat. If they're willing to share the same dedication and excellence of the individual sitting in the first seat, there can be harmony. There can be beauty. It's not just the person sitting in the first seat. It's got to be the person sitting in the second seat as well, because as one man who directed the orchestra in New York City, one of the most famed directors that there is, he said that playing the second chair is the most difficult position to play, because if no one plays second, there is no harmony. No one plays second, there is no harmony. And you know, in families and in organizations and teams and in churches, a lot of them run into problems because everybody wants to be number one. Okay, everybody wants to be number one. And one of the things that, you just think about the world of basketball, professional basketball, super teams, what we now know is that they don't work. Because it's not, rarely, in almost any sport, rarely does the most talented team win. But it's the team that can learn to play together the best. The team that can get in sync and click when they're supposed to. Who can handle adversity. Rarely is it the most talented team that actually comes out on top. Okay? It will take you to some places, but it won't help you when it matters the most. And so it's important that you have someone who's willing to play a vital role. And in understanding that every role is important. Every role is important. Now, some people say that, you can kind of hear the old jokes in the background. It's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. Yeah, said losers everywhere. You can hear those things in the background, the battle cry of the losers, right? But the truth of the matter is, that's accurate. There are things about the phrase that every person matters. It's completely accurate. If you go to someone who has been able to have success, whether it be in their business or whether it be as a coach or as someone who's leading an organization, one of the things that you'll constantly find them doing is when people try and put all the credit on their shoulders, they will immediately send that credit back out to the people who have worked with them. Because they have truly understood that what they're involved with is too big for one person to accomplish. And that it takes truly every person doing what they're supposed to be doing in order to accomplish the things that need to be accomplished. And so, tonight I want us to think about this through a church standpoint and the notion that the New Testament points out that every member is important. Every member is important. Whether it be Romans 12 or 1 Corinthians chapter 12 or Ephesians 4, that each part, when it does its share, each body part, the body of Christ grows and builds itself up in love. And so, when we think about this tonight, what I want us to do is just two simple things. First of all, I want us to look at a handful of examples in both Old and New Testaments where you have people who are playing that second fiddle role, so to speak. They're not the guy, but they're helping him. And then think through and offer some encouragements to us as we go through. So first of all, let's begin with a few examples. One of these we will know, and the other is not as well known, if anyone has ever heard his name at all, and that is the individuals of Aaron and Hur. Aaron and Hur. So if you have your Bibles in Exodus chapter 17, In Exodus chapter 17, after they've exited Israel, moving towards Sinai, they enter into a battle with Amalek. And it says in verse 8, "Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, 'Choose for us men that will go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand at the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand.' So Joshua did as Moses told him, and fought with Amalek while Moses and Aaron and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed, and whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew weary, so that they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and one on the other side. So his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword." So what do you have? You have a situation where they go into battle and every person has to play a role. Okay? In this illustration, we're highlighting, whether or not Moses' hands stay in the air really determine the outcome of the battle. And so Aaron and Hur come to his aid to help him because he can't keep his arms up that long. Okay? They provide a seat for him, and then one takes one arm and one takes the other arm, and they keep it in the air. So even if you think about this whole situation, who's the most important in this whole situation? I don't know that you could really argue anybody is absolutely the most important. Moses has got to keep his hands up. He's got to have support to keep his hands up. Joshua has got to go into battle. He's got to take people with him into battle. If one of those elements is missing, just one, what happens? The exact opposite. And so, understanding that every single person has a role to play, and playing that role leads to the fulfillment of what God wants us to do. Another individual would be the man Caleb. He's one of the two faithful spies in Numbers chapter 13, that when they go into the promised land and 10 of the spies are giving an evil report, he quiets the people before Moses, Numbers 13 and verse 30, and says, "Let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it." That is, everybody else is saying we can't, and he's saying we can. Now, obviously, the only other person that stood with him on that occasion was Joshua. And you get into Numbers chapter 14, and that is given to us in greater detail. Now, if you look at them and you follow their careers, so to speak, Joshua becomes basically the highest ranking official in Israel. Caleb, he never really, he has a great life. He's given a mountain. He's given a large inheritance in the people in the new nation in Israel. But he doesn't ever get to that same level that Joshua gets in position. And it would be very easy for Caleb to have sat back and gone, "I'm just as important as Joshua is." When the spies were saying that we couldn't win the battle, it wasn't Joshua that spoke up, it was me. I've been just as faithful to God as he has been. There's no sense of jealousy. No sense of jealousy. Both men played important roles in the history of Israel, and they were supportive of one another from everything that we can see in Scripture. And so here you have a man who was willing to, yes, he was a leader in Israel. Caleb was one of the heads of the tribes. He was one of the ones chosen to spy out the land. But he would never become what Joshua would, but he didn't allow that to embitter him. Just because I'm not him, I won't be happy. It's not his approach. But then you think about, as you fast forward, you think about Jonathan, the son of Saul. He is one that is absolutely phenomenal in my mind. Because he's the heir apparent to the throne. If Saul's house continues, he's the guy that takes over. As a matter of fact, in 1 Samuel 20, when he's trying to kill David, Jonathan is covering for him, so to speak. And his father says to him, "Why are you covering for him? Don't you know that as long as he lives, you will never be king in Israel?" And Jonathan's response is, yeah. And then there's this wonderful text about their relationship in 1 Samuel chapter 23, when David is being hunted down by Saul. In 1 Samuel chapter 23 in verse 15, it says, David saw that Saul had come to seek his life, and David was in the wilderness of Ziph at Horesh. And Jonathan, Saul's son, rose and went to David at Horesh and strengthened his hand in God, and said to him, do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you. Saul my father also knows this, and the two of them made a covenant before the Lord. David remained at Horesh, and Jonathan went home. So not only is Jonathan accepting the fact that he will never be king, he's actually he is the best friend and the biggest supporter of the man who will have the job that for all intents and purposes should have been his. And when he knows David is dogged down from all of the running, he himself goes and finds him and says, look, I know you're frustrated, but don't be afraid. Nothing's going to happen to you. Even my father knows that this is good, this is right. Even my father knows that you're going to be the next king in Israel. It's wonderful. He just supporting. Content to play. And notice what he says, and you will be king in Israel, and I will be next to you. Now, obviously, that never happens because he dies. But you see the spirit that rests within him that says, you're going to take the job that's intended for me, I'm supporting you, and I want to be right next to you and help you at every step of the way. Then when we come to the New Testament, we hear this man who is almost unknown, and that's Joseph Barsabas. You remember in Acts chapter 1 when they said, okay, it's time to replace Judas? There were two people who were put forth to be a replacement. Matthias is the one who is chosen. Joseph Barsabas, Justus, is not. Now, one of the things we know is that both he and Matthias had to have both been with Jesus from the beginning of his ministry, from the time of the baptism of John all the way up through the resurrection. Joseph Barsabas had been just as dedicated to Jesus as all of the other men who were serving as apostles. Just as dedicated. And then they look up to God and say, God, which one have you chosen for this office? And God says, if you want to interpret it through through Barsabas' eyes, God said it wasn't me. Now, it wouldn't take very long to follow that rabbit trail down and spiral into something pretty quick. What's wrong with me? Why didn't he pick me? What was the deficiency? Why didn't he think I could do this? And you know, one of the things you never read about in Acts, you never read about Barsabas going around saying, you know what, Matthias shouldn't have been there, it should have been me. I would have done it better, I would have done it differently. The fact that he disappears from the scene shows you that he didn't walk around, he didn't quit, he just simply did what he always did and he went to work. He served the way he was supposed to serve, the way he had always done. And then another individual very close to that you could look at as Barnabas. You know, Barnabas plays a significant role in the New Testament. But you know, Barnabas never becomes an apostle. He never becomes Paul. As a matter of fact, you could argue that much of Paul's rise and success is attributed to Barnabas. Because in Acts 9, when he's a new Christian and he's trying to join the church at Jerusalem, nobody will believe him. And Barnabas is the one that steps up and says, no, this is legitimate. We need to listen to him. And when Saul or Paul goes to Tarsus to withdraw, and it seems to receive some revelations from God, although that's a little murky. Who is it that goes looking for Saul and says, I need somebody to help me in ministry? It's Barnabas. In Acts chapter 11, he goes to Tarsus and he finds him, and then that's where we get that famous statement, oh, and the disciples were first called Christians in Antioch. And then what happens? Well, Saul/Paul's star continues to rise. And it exceeds that of Barnabas. And Barnabas could have just as easily said, there's no Paul without me. And I'm the one that actually got him into ministry. I'm the one that trained him for ministry. But that's not what he does. So what does it all mean? How should this encourage us in how we handle things? I think we need to remember, first of all, that each of us matter to God. Each of us matter to God. There is nothing too big or too little. Listen, if we were to sit here tonight, I feel pretty confident that in the next couple of hours, I could probably chart for you all the things that it takes for this church to function. I would miss a few, but it would take me a couple of hours to chart for you how this place functions. When we came in tonight, why were the lights on? You think we've never had electrical problems? Who fixed them? Who paid the electrical bill? Who gave the money? That carpet's been vacuumed. That air conditioning is running. Mercifully, that air conditioning is running. It matters. And a lot of times, so many people think that serving God means doing something big. It doesn't. Matter of fact, I think I can pretty strongly argue the fact of just showing up is doing something. Showing up is just showing up does something. It changes and enhances the environment. And God takes stock of that, and God notices that. Okay? The next thing that every individual here has to understand is that they matter to all of us. We all matter to each other. And that's not just some kind of cheesy rallying cry. And I'm not the type of person that would say that if I didn't legitimately believe it is true. As a matter of fact, what's gotten me a lot of trouble in my life is I won't say something because I don't believe it's true. Okay? Now, I may not have always believed this the way that I do now. I would fully admit that as a young, well, for lack of a better term, we'll just leave it alone. As a young guy who thought he had it figured out. But what we're involved in is so much bigger than one person. Like, it just can't, or just a handful of people. It can't be done. It just can't be done. And if you start pulling and subtracting certain people, the whole thing just falls apart. It's like pulling that sweater on the thread. You start pulling it, and everything, it touches everything. It just starts completely coming undone. And so, it seems to me like every position matters. It's like coaching youth baseball, and nobody wants their kid to play where? The outfield. I don't know anything. I'm not going to say anything about upper baseball, but I can tell you this, having coached a little bit of youth baseball, your outfield will make you or break you. It will win your games. Can you keep a single or can you keep a double to a single? Can you keep a triple to a double? It makes a huge difference about how quickly you can move to the ball, get it in, and stop the bleeding. I've been in games, I've seen games where that was the difference. Not even catching the ball as it comes to them, just getting it stopped up and getting it back in where it needs to be is the difference in winning and losing. So it seems as if every single person matters. So with that in mind, this is what I would say. Play whatever role that you can. This is why, look, because every person matters, I can't speak for everybody, but when I walk into the auditorium and I see people missing, I'm not going to say it overwhelms me, but it does have an effect on me that they're not here. Now, I don't know exactly why. There may be, I don't assume that somebody's not here because, they just don't want to be or something along those lines. But it's on my radar. It registers that people are not here. And if that is true, that's why just showing up alone, bringing presence and energy, it produces something. And so a lot of times we take for granted doing the simplest of things that can help create energy and momentum. And that is people showing up. No one is saying, no one is saying you're not faithful if you don't lead a ministry or you don't teach or you don't lead in public worship or lead in something along the... Look, it takes everybody. What if everybody were a teacher? This is Paul's argument, right? If the whole body was an ear, how would you smell? If everybody were a teacher, where would you have a student? Who would you be teaching? You have to have everybody. And in every church, you see these dynamics come to work where certain people, just the way they are and the way they interact with other people, they bring a sense of energy that if you subtract that individual, the entire dynamic of the church changes immediately. It absolutely changes immediately. So whether it's leading ministries, whether it's serving in them, whether it's showing up, whether it's encouraging people, whether it's just building a friendship, speaking to people, calling someone, texting someone, all of those things matter. Because really, one of the things that we have come to learn, even scientifically, is that it's not usually monumental things that are detrimental. It's little things. That's why James Clear has become just a phenomenon in the last few years for writing his book, Atomic Habits. The belief that you should come in and you should simply try and get 1% better every day. Forget about trying to get 20% and 30% and 40%. If you just get 1% better every day, at the end of the year, how much better would you be than when you started? 365% better. Now, that's not flashy and it's not fancy. But good grief, when you stop and think about it at the end of it, pretty stinking good. And by the way, that's assuming that you can only get to 1% every day. And assuming that 1%, as you and I both know, that 1% that you're getting better that day, you're 1% better, which means now the 1% you gain the next day is what? It's actually a little more than the 1% of the day before, because now you've grown. And so the 1% you're growing is dealing with something that has grown even more. You get into finance, you talk about compounding interest. When Jesus said in Matthew 10 and verse 42, "Whoever gives one of these little ones just a cup of cold water in my name will in no wise lose his reward." He's not just saying that to make us feel better. He's saying it because he believes it to be true. He knows it's true. And just from personal experience, I can tell you, the people that I have probably... Look, there are special people I've learned a lot of things from, in the sense that they were just super intelligent, super influential, and they really shaped me. But the shaping that has most taken place, the shaping that has happened the most to my heart, in my character, that really forced me to examine myself in new ways and to hopefully change for the better, have been people that most people wouldn't think you'd learn from. When I was in Oxford, Alabama, we had a lady named Miss Deb who was there, and she had beaten an addiction years before. She was probably in her late 50s, early 60s when I knew her. And I mean, she was raising her grandkids. She was on government support. Her situation was not ideal. She had nothing. Many of the members took care of her and made sure that they had what they needed. So Oxford was, like this congregation, I believe, a very generous church. They had a lot of causes they gave to on a regular basis and would take up special contributions to them. And so Miss Deb, for one of the special contributions, gave $1. $1. I learned more from that contribution than I've ever learned from a contribution in my life. That's different. You looked at what she could do, what her talents were, the time that she had, all the things that if you're doing some kind of statistical analysis, she wouldn't register on your charts. Except she changed lives in a simple way. We have to understand this. We can't do this. There are things this church is very capable of doing. But it would take every person. It would take every single person to do it. What we're able to do depends on, just think about it in terms of these lines. What are you able to do in your home financially? What is that dependent upon? The amount of money you got coming in, right? You can only operate with what you can get your hands on, right? Well, there are things that churches are very capable of. But there's not enough incoming energy. There's not enough incoming people who are willing to do just little things. that could really revolutionize and make huge differences. And so there are big things, and that's what we'll spend, hopefully in a few weeks, sitting down and talking about together in a round table, trying to figure out what we're going to do in 2025. But really, a lot of that depends on us, and if we're willing to play second fiddle. And I got to be honest with you, second fiddle a lot of times is a whole lot of fun. You ain't responsible for nothing. And that is a nice feeling sometimes, right? But ultimately, if we look at it the right way, aren't we all playing second fiddle to God? I mean, it's what He's doing. We're just hopefully sitting in the second chair, not making it sound really bad. And so it's just an honor to be invited to play. And so that's the privilege. And so tonight the question is if we will come to Him and to participate, and maybe that's we've never become Christians, maybe we're Christians and we haven't maybe done what we can and should. Maybe we're just struggling with certain things. A lot of things go on. But, something happened this morning. You saw a whole bunch of support staff do what this morning? You looked down at the front of this auditorium. What was going on? There were a whole bunch of people doing something simple but yet profound. That's the difference between living churches and dead ones. People who simply cared for each other. And so, thank you for that, and hopefully we can continue to progress in that. If we can help you tonight, we want to. Let us know as we stand and sing this song.